Today we are speaking with Ahola Ward, who is the CEO at CircleClick Media. She was dubbed the mother of startups by CNN, is an entrepreneur, futurist, and a published O'Reilly author. Ward was named one of Entrepreneur's 27 top masters of marketing that everyone can learn from in 2014, and top 50 inspirational entrepreneurs to watch in 2017. She has more recently led the way for advances in blockchain technology and is the first woman to complete an STO under the ERC 884 standard. And thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we obviously know each other from working at our work together at Orchid, and I'm super happy to have you on the show. Maybe you just start off with telling us a little bit more about your background. Just some other highlights, because I could have had a ton more in that intro, but you've done more than 30 TV appearances. You've done $10 million worth of products. I mean, like, the list just goes on. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself, and we can kind of go from there.
Well, thank you. That's so kind. I definitely am a geek's geek, and I think my official calling card is futurist. I had a science fair project as a child where I basically invented a wearable and got a C on it, and I remember thinking, that's not right. This is where we're going. And so it was always a thing for me that I would be wherever technology was. And so I started out my career as a developer, and then I migrated into SEO as the field was forming, because I really truly loved analytics. In my family, my father was a fraud examiner auditor, and so he had this very hard analytical side that I inherited, but I also have this sort of more creative spirit. And so SEO is really the combination of those two things, and really became my passion, because it's always changing. You're always learning. There's just so much you can do and so many places to grow. So I kind of got that nickname from being the person that you call when you're ready for your Series A and you need to be able to show the math of how you're going to spend that money, or that you deserve that money. And so it's something I worked very hard for, and I'm very proud of.
And so that started out with SEO, but I imagine now with CircleClick, you cover a lot of ground from a marketing skill set standpoint, and do sort of soup to nuts everything that could be involved in that process for, I imagine for like a Series A type raise. And correct me if I'm wrong, but like, there's a lot of different channels you could use that you'd have expertise in that you've probably gathered over the years.
Absolutely, yes. And I have a team of 5, and I basically come to the party with a team ready to roll to do whatever needs to be done. And that's something that I've learned is very important in startup life, because often developers are working on product, competition is tough. And so by having a team I can take into any company and execute on what I'm saying, that puts me just a whole world above most agencies who just give you recommendations or they tell you what to do. I actually will do what I say, and that is what's earned me my reputation and success in my career. And I wouldn't have it any other way, because I'm a technical SEO, and so everyone on my team at some point has been a developer, if they're not currently, and that's something I'm very proud of.
So I want to go back to the science fair project. What was the wearable?
I basically sewed a watch to a t-shirt and a bunch of other like doodads. And I said, in the future, we're not going to have time to like look at our hands. It's going to just need to be available. I was basically trying to build some sort of like an armor. But apparently my documentation was lacking the supporting.
That's awesome.
So I caught a lot of grief for that one, but then I was like, you know what? When wearables became so big later, I was like, yes, vindicated, because I saw a world where technology wouldn't just be what it was. It was always evolving, and it was always going to be something exciting.
I love that story. I think you might know this about me, but my background is in education. I started out as a high school and middle school teacher, and have taught every grade from like kindergarten all the way to grad school level courses. And I love, my passion when I was a teacher was essentially teaching lean startup skills to high school, middle school kids. And so I think, it's interesting, that experience for you was such a good opportunity to give you the bug for technology and for making your ideas a reality. I'm bummed that, that your teacher gave you a C on it, but it didn't deter you, which is great.
It didn't. It didn't. I mean, you're probably too young to know when everybody got those phones that were clear,
Clear? No, I don't.
and it showed all the components of the phone of a landline. And so I remember one of my first like weird geek things I did is I took it apart.
I vaguely
And
remember that.
yeah, I took it apart because I was like, well, I could see how it works. I want to know how it all works. And so my dad caught me and he was like, that's fine. I'm just going to watch you put it back together. And I did. And so I learned things by doing. And so that critical experience, my parents were actually really supportive. They were like, yeah, that teacher doesn't get you. So I had that kind of support at home to continuously chase what I was interested in. And so I did.
That's awesome. And I want to talk a little bit more about some of your work, as a commentator. How did you get involved in these TV appearances? What are the things that you advise on and talk about when you're on like CNN as an example?
So it wasn't something that I necessarily sought out to do. I, for years, was just sort of the person behind the scenes, and that was enough for me. It really actually took the wake of Me Too to anger me enough to sort of realize that maybe there were some experiences where my talents were downplayed, where I was treated differently, and I got very upset, as did many women, especially in, Silicon Valley. A lot of us felt that sort of anger and that pain. And so I decided that, getting mad is one thing, getting even is another. So as a do it, get it done kind of girl, I hired a publicist and I just started putting it out there because I made a decision in the wake of all of that over my dead body would certain unnamed people be the voices of Silicon Valley when there are plenty of us women there who know what's going on, who are capable and skilled, but we're just too busy doing all the work. So I didn't want to be one of those who kind of stayed behind the scenes. That was, it was also right after my book came out and I sort of felt like, okay, I'm ready for another challenge. And so those two things happened right around the same time. So it was my way of paving it forward for future women and vindication for myself for so many years of being behind the scenes.
And were you speaking about issues from like specifically to Me Too, or were you also just sharing your expertise in the areas of marketing and like were there some specific topics that you were speaking to and
Well, CNN specifically, that was about a specific startup where Me Too had sort of rippled through it and there was lawsuits and things. But that was really the only time. Generally, I think, the fact that I'm a woman is kind of boring. So it's like part of who I am, but it's not
yeah.
all that I am. And I think there are other people much more qualified to talk about gender issues. I can only speak to my experience, and my experience is mostly technical marketing and growth and those sorts of things. So I quickly found that it was better for me to talk about those topics because I knew so much more and I was comfortable. And, I don't think that we do a great job in Silicon Valley of educating people as to what's happening. I think people see things like, oh, scooters, they're everywhere, they're in trees, but we don't really take the time to explain to the rest of the world. So, I woke up
Yeah.
probably 10 times and drove to Sacramento at 6 a.m. to tell the good people of Sacramento about what memes were. Or, and so I think part of being an ambassador for Silicon Valley, a self-appointed one, is to also take the time to explain things to people in a way that they can understand. And so that's very important to me, that technology is accessible, because when technology is not accessible, it can become limiting. And that's the opposite of what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, so let's keep going down on that thread as a futurist. What are you excited about? And from an accessibility standpoint, I think technology can be a great equalizer, it can also be it cause a lot of problems, like we've seen with social media and whatnot, and exacerbate some of these issues, whether it's access or whether it's stuff to do with Me Too, and
I mean, when I say accessibility, I mean mainly in terms of people having access to technology or understanding of what that's going to do for them. So, like a great example where I think we're going to see huge gains this next year is VR and AR. I've spent some time in that industry, and it's beautiful because of the possibilities as we're spending more time at home. I think, VR headsets are getting more affordable. You used to have like basically a full on gaming setup at $2,000 in a room to yourself. Like you had to have a lot of things to really adopt VR. And now we're seeing it for, field trips for kids. We're seeing it for, medicine, for training, for, pilots. AR is, I think, really the more mass scale of the two, because I mean everybody in their sisters done AR and just didn't know it, and that's when they reached their sort of mass adoption moment because of Snapchat filters, IG filters. Those are AR. So great technology is working at its best when you don't know that you're using it.
yeah.
So I think we're going to see some huge advancements there. I'm trying to think of the name of Invisix is a company that is working on heads-up display, which basically means there's a display in front of you in AR for your windshield.
Yeah, there's some exciting, really cool stuff. I can't remember the company now off the top of my head, but I saw one that was down in LA that they modified construction helmets with a visor, and you put a phone that points with the screen facing the visor, and the visor just pulls down in front of your face, and then it's AR, it's augmented reality. So it's almost like Zoom. You've got like someone who's coaching you in the right side of the screen, and then the whole rest of the interface is like a wrench goes here. It's like a 3D wrench showing you how to like fix machinery. I mean, there's just so many cool things that are already here that seem like they're future, but they're not. It's here. It's actively being used.
Exactly. Training. There's so many industrial applications. I think, we're seeing dollars shift. I think because of so much education now happening online, education and entertainment, I think, are going to be the two greenest pastures for next year. And the projections are actually that VR, AR spending, between devices and everything else is supposed to top out at $10 billion next year.
Wow.
I mean, that'll be the most ever spent. And so that's very exciting for a number of reasons. But I think it's a good way for, AR is okay for younger ages. VR, you kind of have to feel it out by device because certain age groups it's not advised. But like under, I think it's 10. But each device has its own rules. But that gives a whole world of imagination and excitement in a time when that's kind of lacking. So I think that's a beautiful way for technology to help. I also think headless technology. I think 2021 is going to be an amazing year for headless technology, which basically just means when front end is decoupled from technology back end. So it's been a term in software forever, but we're seeing it now with drones delivering packages. You're ordering, dish soap through voice,
right?
Driverless cars, all sorts of fun things. Like I think headless technology is going to really be stepped up a notch, and the investment dollars are actually showing that trend already.
What I'd also love to hear your thoughts on. I know this is kind of pivoting a little bit, but the FCC recently moved to regulate social media. And I think today, actually, we just saw the antitrust against Google, which is sort of related. And you and I have discussed this before in the past, this idea of the spread of disinformation online, its impact on our democracy, the use of these platforms to spread that information. we've got the election in 2 weeks. Where are you seeing the future of these platforms, and in the context of how they're used for things, for things that are troubling for our democracy, and what are your thoughts on some of these like regulations that are coming down the pipe?
I mean, I obviously think that, you know, somebody needs to call the geek squad for our government. Like, I wish that like a tech leader in Silicon Valley would adopt each person in Congress. Like, I wish could be some kind of buddy program. And I actually looked into it at one point to volunteer, and I went to a couple state blockchain meetings, but because they couldn't even agree on the definition of blockchain. I think the central problem happens at the root because we can't decide legally if social media is news or is it something else. Is it a free speech platform? Every single site that allows any kind of chat or mobile anything, discussion has had the same issue. So it's, how do you moderate content? Do you not moderate content? I think Twitter has been worst offender in that they were the slowest to react. They've done so very unevenly. And so I think the government is trying to not have a repeat of 2016 because that was just embarrassment on a level unknown to most Americans. And just chaos, unnecessary strife, because we don't know how to regulate what it has become, because I don't think anybody could have anticipated necessarily, except for a good futurist, what what it would be the implication of everybody being online in the same place. And so, I really am a big fan of Electronic Freedom Foundation. I'm a big fan of these other sites that are working hard, the fact checkers. But the fact is that I think we've been too slow to respond to what's happening now. And so we're seeing just bans on certain URLs, and it feels very uneven. And so I don't really have the answer. I just think more people in technology need to be working with the people that make these decisions. And then maybe there can be an understanding at the root level of what is social network. Like, what is a social network? Is it a news site? Does it fall under that set of guidelines, or do we need to build a new site? Because they're just going to run wild.
Yeah.
They're going to keep running wild. And the press is really the only check and balance. So antitrust lawsuits there's so many going in Europe against Google because they're a little less afraid than us in some ways. But I honestly think that it's too much trial and error, and there's a human cost to that. And we've been seeing that for a little too long for my taste.
Yeah, I think there's some human cost creep as well that's happening, where it's sort of, and it's probably been that way for a long time. And I think from a privacy standpoint, and a data security standpoint, and just a operational security standpoint for an individual, I think people don't really realize that what they're giving up when they participate in these ecosystems and like on these platforms. And this is, again, something else that you and I have talked about a lot, in the past couple of weeks, is just the idea that if you're not careful with your information, that it's easy for these companies own your information, and it's easy for other people to figure out a lot about you by just looking at your social media profile.
Right. I learned, I think, in maybe it was university, very young in my career, in my life, that information is power. And so I came out of the gate, I was using PGP in college. Like, I was doing things a lot of people weren't. No one understood it. And it was because I understood what could happen with the information. My first like technical job was as a DBA. I talked my way into it, University of Texas, because I was the only one who knew what the program was. And I just sort of took it from there. And so I knew that information was power, and I think we forget that. And so I think a lot of the bad things that happen when people forget. They forget that they don't have to give their birth date. They don't have to fill out certain things to the T. They don't have to give their middle initial. They don't have to, so I have an internet birth date for all social networks. I have a persona I've built that has different ages, and so I know that there's for sure profiles on me and I'm aware of it, but I also know that my GPS is off. And so I think our notions of privacy will change over time, but I think, it's just like a pendulum, right? It's going to swing one way and then it's going to swing back. And I think we're due for the swing back. And I just think a lot of people don't know it because they're getting what they want. As long as consumers get what they want, change is not going to happen.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Do you think we're going to have a swing to, I feel like more and more people are becoming more aware of the need for privacy and that they are giving up a lot, but then again, it's hard. It's kind of hard to tell, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. Are people becoming more aware about this, and if so, how will that evolve from a services standpoint going forward to help people? Because I feel like the education role that you talked about, right? Like the buddy system in Congress, to help them. I mean, these are individuals who should be using these security measures, and probably most of them are not. Right? In many ways, a lot of them are probably vulnerable to some of these issues. So I'm wondering if you think there's new technology, new services, new initiatives. Like, what do you think is going to come down the pipeline in the next 5 or so years, or not, depending on which way society decides to go?
Well, I think a lot of what happens next is going to depend on the outcome of the election. If we're able to all agree to the outcome of the election, if there's a peaceful transfer of power, then we're good. But I think as long as technology is based off of centralized information where a coveted few can hold the keys to the kingdom, then I think we're just going to continue to have more of the same. Maybe we'll have a few lawsuits where they're broken up. Maybe they'll spin off divisions, but we all know what's going to happen. So I think decentralization is really truly going to be the democratization of technology. And I think the only way that we're going to have any true change is going to be through that. I think, I don't know if it's going to take another hacking scandal or, however many more millions of people have credit cards stolen. I don't know what it's going to be, what that moment will be, but it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very firm belief it's coming. And I think we need to deeply question centralization. And, do I want to be on Mastodon? Not so much. But do I have an account and do I respect the fact that it exists? Yes. But we need more tools like that where the power is held by individuals rather than, and even Brave, with their token and things that they're doing, at least there's an effort there to give power to the people. Because I think sometimes the most powerful move is to give up control, but there's too much money at stake at this point. So I'm hopeful of what I see happening in blockchain and other areas. There are some very smart people working to change the status quo, and I'm confident that with enough effort and enough time, they will.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, on that thread, what are there some other up and coming projects that you see that you're excited about that are potentially solving some of these problems that around centralization? You mentioned Brave and you mentioned Mastodon, but are there a few others that you've noticed that you think are interesting potential solutions?
Solutions to privacy or solutions to
I guess it's privacy and data.
The evil corp.
Yeah, I think it's privacy and data, control. I think those are the two. I think there's an intersection between privacy and control of your data and the centralization of the data that then causes your privacy to be violated. So I don't know if you have any other ideas there on some interesting ones, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
There was a privacy highlighter that came out recently where you could put a website in and it would show you all the things that we're tracking. I'm not remembering the name of it right now.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I was beyond excited about that one because I was like, ooh, because I can just look at the source.
Yeah, right.
And
yeah.
as a developer, I just look and I can read it. Most of the time, people are not smart enough to hide these things. Or not smart enough, but you know what I mean? No one makes that effort.
Yeah, well, why would they?
But yeah,
No
because
looking.
it's no one's looking at the source. Yeah, so this, seeing tools like that, Electronic Freedom Foundation has Privacy Badger. So there are plugins coming for browsers where you can actively block pop-ups. I have a number of those going. Basically, any kind of blocker. If you look in Chrome Store now or other places, there are absolutely a number of tools that have come along where you can, block people from seeing when you've read their emails or seeing, so I think the tools are coming because the money is there, because people
are paying for
in many ways are getting, they're hungry for it. And so I think,
so what
those are the ones
that
excite me the most.
Because you mentioned you were like one of the first people to adopt, or not first people to adopt, but you were doing some things in college that like other people weren't doing. So what are your day-to-day tools that you use to protect your data and privacy on your own?
Well, obviously Orchid. Shameless plug. I use VPN, but I'm not your average bear. So like I at times have been known to use proxies because I want to see what an experience is like in another country. So you can use proxy services. You can actually buy or rent proxy IPs. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can do, but that's just because of the nature of what I do. I'm interested in what's happening in other parts of the world. I have every kind of privacy. I have like robo dialer blockers. I hate getting robo dials. I've had the same phone number for 20 years.
I need that. I need that robo blocker app.
Yeah, and it doesn't actually block. Yeah, and it says that it blocks texts, but it doesn't. So I will report them to my service providers. So some things I still have to do manually, like those political texts you keep getting. I report each one to service provider, then I unsubscribe, then I block. So certain things I do manually.
How do we report those? Can you please tell us?
Almost every major carrier has a spam number you can text. You have to look up each provider. I save mine in my address book. So when I get one that's just really egregious, I report it to your ISP. And the thing is, if we all take that extra second and report instead of saying stop or block, it actually helps them shut these people down. People with sarcastic finger quotes, because they're obviously not people, but they're bots and dialers. So I definitely have my weird custom setup. I also carry 2 phones.
Yeah.
And one of them does not have any social media on it. And that is the only phone where I will use GPS.
Interesting.
Because I don't like my location being known unless I want it known. So I have all kinds of weird. I think my biggest tool is just my healthy sense of skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
In that I don't by default give any app anything. Yeah, I don't use OAuth, which a lot of people do because it's easier. You're like, oh yeah, I'll click and use my Twitter login. I'll click and use my Facebook. It's like, congratulations, you've just handed all that data over to the developers. And I was for a while telling people on Facebook when they were doing those inane quizzes, like, hey, by the way, you just gave all your personal information and your contacts to these companies. And then finally, my husband was just like, you need to stop that.
Yeah, we saw what happened with that.
You're going to lose all your friends if you keep telling.
We saw what happened with that.
Exactly. So, and I was doing that before because I was one of those people who combs what authorized apps. And sure enough, every once in a while, I'd find one I didn't authorize, or I'd find one that had changed hands. And, in one case, I found a company that had been acquired, and here is this other new information, other company looking at my information. So, that, and I also have an elaborate system of custom emails. Mm-hmm. So like I have an Instacart email. I have I basically use special custom emails for everything.
Do you have a software tool that you
So
use for
I can
that
track.
to auto generate them?
You can actually set it up in almost any email provider if you know to do it. And you can, on most major services like Gmail, you can create unique emails on the fly by putting a plus sign after your handle. So just plus whatever modifier. So you're signing up for, volunteer karate league or whatever. I don't know where that came from, but like, so, and plus karate, plus, and you can create on the fly, but I actually have my domain set up at my business email to catch anything that is incorrect, because I don't like bounces. Bounces to me are failures. So I will create don't spam me. But my favorite example is South by Southwest, because I've been going to that for so many years because I'm from Austin. So every year, like 2017 was the year that I think I got the record amount of spam. So I actually track it year over year. But
That's funny. You just go and you look at like you just go in your spam folder and look, and you say, "Oh, this year I got how many." So what? Yeah. So what's the record? How many spam emails did you get in 2017?
Custom emails can be filtered, so they go into little filters. I think their record was something like 3,000.
I thought I was expecting something higher, to be honest. I thought it was gonna be like 30,000. 3,000 is still a lot though. I feel like I get at least a couple hundred a day.
See, that means you're not curating your stuff.
Yeah, I'm terrible. I'm terrible with my email organization.
We'll start giving out custom ones, and you'll see that you can start filtering them. And I've done it for events for years, so I can see how they remarket my stuff, how they target ads to me, because you can also have emails used to target you. So
I always love picking people's brains about like what tactics and tools they use, and I like playing around with these products. I was probably I was an early product hunt user. I like finding new products and tools, and especially things that have to do with data and privacy. Yeah, I thought I lost my train of thought there. There was something you said that was interesting about the emails.
Filtering?
No.
Tools?
Yeah, it had to do with tools. It was something you used. Anyway, I just always think it's
privacy badger.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting for people, especially like listening that don't do, like, for example, I'm not that good with my email as far as like different filters and stuff to hear like, there's the GPS thing. So the fact that you have two phones, right? Like,
yeah,
and the authorizations of the apps. I don't think people think about that in their day-to-day, the fact that all the social media apps that you use, and then any application that you authorize with that, use the OAuth to create a profile on some new app with your Facebook account, your Twitter account. They can get access to a lot of your data. And, we probably all should be taking those measures so that they can't just track where you are, because anybody, potentially, theoretically, anybody could get access to that data at some point.
Right. I mean, the best tool is a healthy skepticism of anything you add to your phone, and to understand that anything you think of your phone as giving you information, know that it's taking just as much, if not more. Yeah. Like we think of it giving us, it's taking every second, So that's okay. That's a deal that we've made, and it's not harming us in many cases. But I think to be skeptical and say, do I really need to give this like app that adds cool filters to my selfies? Do I really need to give it access to my address book? Do I really need it to know my location? So you can absolutely toggle your preferences to allow what you want and don't want. Most people think they have to accept it. You actually don't.
Yeah, and I think this is going to maybe sound like a little paranoid, but there's not. We live in a country where luckily it hasn't mattered as much, right? Like, at least to our knowledge, probably for most of us, the data, probably not much bad has happened to most people, although some people get their identities stolen. But in other countries, this kind of thing is used to surveil the population and at scale, and it can be used in and there has been mass surveillance in the U.S. before, and I think it's just maybe that ends up being one of the things that happens. You know, you mentioned like, yeah, there could be another big hack, or like, what is it that's going to be that will swing the pendulum back towards everybody now becomes aware and stops being so flippant with their data. You know, there's something that comes out that says, you know, that shows that there's this. I mean, we talked about it with when I did the episode with Cindy from the EFF. You know, the dragnet surveillance of servers that were owned by Google by the NSA. You know, something similar to that nature across these social media platforms, even if you're not doing anything wrong. I don't know. I guess the rant here that I'm going on is just that we live in a place where we're very secure and we don't have to worry about this, so we kind of take it for granted. And that's been a theme across multiple of the interviews that I've done and building this podcast, is that we just aren't. Many people lack that healthy skepticism, and they're just very flippant. They just click the button and do it without thinking about it. And it's funny because like I always tend to go towards, hey, maybe there's a product or a tool or something we could build to solve this problem, but really it's a behavioral issue and not necessarily that there needs to be some kind of tool.
Well, I mean, keep in mind too, I made quite a bit of money for quite a lot of people by using information that was freely available to me, and that's part of what made my career as successful as it has been, is understanding how to harness information and learn from it. And so that's why I joined the other side a few years ago, because it just got to the point where we were able to develop personas that were just like a sickening degree of accuracy. Like, okay, well, this brand of beer means this person's going to buy this. And it just got to a level where I started to feel uncomfortable. And that's when I switched teams, because I felt like, with my knowledge and expertise in this, I've got to fight the other side, because this side is winning. And, you know, then all the scandals that have broken the last few years, all the hacks, everything. And so I'm glad that I did that when I did, because we need more people fighting for at least the ideals of privacy.
So to that end, you know, what are some of your goals, and how are you working to achieve that, the sort of winning that fight or making a dent in that fight?
Well, so I've done, I'd say, at least a dozen segments on television across the country, talking about how to protect yourself online, how to lock down your social media. I've written a lot about it, providing practical tips for people that just will, little by little, hopefully get them to start thinking about the information they're giving away. I also work, I would say more than half of my clients at this point are now focused on privacy. I work for companies that are challenger brands, and I really enjoy that element. And so I've been focused on working with companies that are challenging status quo and challenging privacy as it is. And so I've been trying harder to find those companies and provide support where I can. And I think aside from that, just talking about it, just giving people a couple tips they can understand makes such a huge difference. You know, everyone in my family has one of those little things that covers the camera, and
yeah,
you know, I try to be a part of the conversation in a way that is meaningful when I can. And other than that, you know, when I see something, I say something. I report things, and I think other people should too.
Yeah, I do. I definitely report things that look like disinformation all the time online. On at least when I'm on Facebook, which I'm not on there very much. So, but anyway, I agree with you, and that's another reason why I got excited about the your reporting to ISP the spam calls, because I didn't know that you could do that. So I will start doing that. I hate them. So we're at about 40 minutes into the show, and typically we do like 45, 50 minutes, and I always ask this towards the end. But you know, what have I not asked you that I should have asked, or that you wanted to share with everybody?
Your question is a meta question. I like it. I don't know. What are 3 ways you can protect yourself on your social media?
Let's do it.
Um, Number one, two-factor authentication across the board. The fact that social media sites do not allow that or do not enforce that by default is just crazy to me. I think everybody needs to have two-factor no matter what. I would also, simple stuff like don't post those vacation photos. I know, before this year, it was kind of a fun thing to do, torture your friends by posting where you were. And, here I am on a beach, da da da. People don't do that as much this year, but I think it's tempting, but it also is like, hey, robbers, I'm not home. Go ahead. And there have been multiple cases of people getting robbed when that happens. And so maybe don't announce things like I'm gone for a week. Because ultimately, I think some of the largest issues have stemmed from people posting where they are, and they don't necessarily need to do that. But I think in terms of the social media sites themselves, what they could be doing better is I think they need to look into themselves, because the last two big Twitter hacks were basically tied to employees.
Yeah.
So that you can't tell me that doesn't hurt, but it also is like, what are their internal procedures there? What are they lacking that this keeps happening? So I think, I think there's a lot of things you can do, but don't allow location tagging. Don't necessarily share things while you're out. There's so many practical things you can do that people just don't think to do.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's tough because some of these apps just make it so easy to give away that information without thinking about it. I mean, a good example is like Strava, which is the running app, which, I run every day. And if I share that information publicly, if I share my Strava account publicly or have it, I have it set to private so only my friends can see what I'm doing. But even that's like a little weird, right? Like they see every time I went for a run that I went for a run like at 12 o'clock when I should have been working. It's like, you got to be careful with that kind of thing. Um,
Well, one thing that helps eliminate temptation is not necessarily with Strava, but other social media, is I have my phone set to have timers on my phone that does have social media. It has timers where I get locked out of the app after X amount of minutes a day. And then no matter what, after 10 p.m., everything goes grayscale.
I love that, and I love that
So,
you brought that up because I think, I mean, this on this show we don't really cover that as much, but I do think it has, especially after the social what is it called, Social Dilemma that came out, the movie on
mm-hmm.
Netflix. I think it really got me thinking more about this, but from a yeah, I feel like it does fit within the theme of like human rights in some way, or democracy, or just like society in general, like a degradation of our mental health from being addicted to these platforms and devices. So I think that practice that you mentioned is super important for us to create real connections with each other, which I think will improve society as a whole.
Mean, it's not all bad. There are some fun things that happen on Twitter when I'm kind of a little bit of a jokester in my personal life, and there's nothing more fun sometimes than like getting a really good joke in or a zing on your sibling or
Yeah.
and especially this year, I think it is a way to connect, but it is not a substitute. And I think studies have led to show us that social media has led to depression and other things, and so that's definitely something I think is going to continue to be studied. But I don't think it's all bad, but I think too much of anything is usually bad. So that's why I think if you don't have the discipline to say, okay, I've had enough, an hour of Instagram a day is enough, then maybe set a timer for yourself and start to gradually wean down, because I am a very firm believer that what you measure improves. Pearson's law. I live and die by that law. And if you measure what you're spending and you feel good about what you're spending, good for you. But if you don't feel good about it, if you feel bad after you get off of Twitter, then limit yourself. If you don't have the discipline, there are tools to actually stop you.
Do you? So you mentioned you lock yourself out of the app. You have an app that actually prevents you from using your social media applications.
So that is actually built into
Built
the
in.
OS on my Android, but there is like Moment. There are other. There's if you just search whichever platform you are, if you search for App Timer or something like that, you will find a slew of great apps that all have kind of their own different twist on it. But the easiest low tech way on an iPhone is to just look at the battery usage,
Mm-hmm.
because that's going to tell you,
Yeah.
where the juice is going.
Yep.
But if you want the actual paternalism, there are tons of apps that do that, and new ones coming out all the time, because this is a very real problem a lot of people are struggling with.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on, Anne. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.